Hey everybody, it's Peter Perry. I'm excited to invite you to Energy Superheroes again. And today we have Tom Ward from Epoch. And Epoch is a designer and manufacturer of battery electric boats with bi-directional energy capability. The company is currently bootstrapped. So if there's venture capitalists out there that are looking to do a pre-seed round, reach out to Tom. Tom's got three full-time, really smart people working on this. Me personally, I love boats and I see a big opportunity in the sector. So we're excited to have Tom here on Energy Superheroes today. Welcome to the podcast, Tom.
Thanks, Peter. It's great to meet you, and I appreciate being able to join you today on the podcast.
Really cool. So you got to tell me about Epoch. First, give me your backstory on how you decide to work on boats, because you're the first company I've seen that's really working on electric boats, and would love to hear your backstory and how you came into this.
Yeah, so it's boating has been a lifelong activity for me. Back in the 80s, my dad had a Hobie Cat, and he had me on that probably at an age that would make parents scream nowadays in the modern world. And went on from that, learned how to sail solo by the time I was 8. Actually got to row in college on the crew team, and then ultimately, as I went into my professional career as an electromechanical engineer, kind of by happenstance found my way into the recreational marine industry and worked at Teleflex Seastar. We supplied 95% of steering systems to the industry. So if you've ever been on like a Boston Whaler or Sea Ray, you've touched products that I designed and developed and maintained. And then moved over to Lippert Components, helped grow out their marine division, and eventually was just kind of looking at the market and dealing with all of these test boats that I had under my control in my personal boat, which were all, internal combustion engine boats, and year on year was rebuilding carburetors and dealing with fuel line issues and water separators and all the real hassle that goes with that, and said, I don't want it anymore, right? I want to follow the Tesla model and go electric, and it'll take away all that hassle and be a better product. And then the trick is just, how do you deal with range anxiety? How do you make it make sense with a boat? And pulled together the team for Epoch. We looked at a real first principle approach to this and said, all right, you have something on the water, we want to move it, right? We want to move people so that they can do whatever activities, fishing, tubing, day boating, etc. How do we do that? How do we make it look different? How do we build it around an electric drivetrain? And that kind of brought us into the hydrofoil system that we developed and have patented. And then we took it the next step and said, now we've got these batteries on the boat, right? And I was looking at Tesla deploying their power walls, and I said, man, our storage on the boat is comparable to a power wall in the smallest boat that we're designing and building. And as we get into bigger boats, there's even more power. And I looked at that and said, man, cars get used almost every day. Even still, they only see about 300 hours of active use. Boats get used on average in the US about 10 days a year, and it's about 50 hours of on the water use. And I said, man, if we've got 60 kilowatt hours of battery on this boat, and it's never being used, essentially, it has an effective utilization rate of 0.57%, we can do something really cool with that and use that as a behind the meter energy store and go help the grid and provide some really cool benefits to our customers and Epoch owners.
That's super cool. I think you guys approached it intelligently. And it's a good point about the fact that there's a lot more storage on boats and that people don't use the boats as much. Here in Florida, the governor just made it, I guess, illegal to not allow net metering. So net metering is going to be allowed here in the state of Florida, which I think is a great thing for the solar energy generally, but also for anything related to electric vehicles and bi-directional charging capability for sure. I don't know, were you monitoring the activities down here in Florida?
I saw that. I saw those headlines this morning and was a little bit surprised, but grateful. I think it's the right decision, and certainly helps what we're trying to do in our little small ecosystem of Epoch. But at a larger utility scale, I think it's the right move, and I think it's great for Florida and good for the world.
Absolutely. So tell me about your team there at Epoch. How did you get these other two team members to come along with you? Were they founders? Did they join after the fact?
We all kind of came together. So jumping back to about a year ago is when I really got the itch for Epoch and started looking at it and started really doing some deep research and, putting together some real skeleton models of what this looks like from a market standpoint, who the customers would be, what our costing would look like, and kind of how we could deploy it. And over the summer, I kind of developed those and did the research by myself, and then started looking at, what does the team need to be? Where are our gaps in our skill sets? And fortunately, having been in the marine industry for a while, I had some really great colleagues and former colleagues that I was able to reach out to. And, in the beginning, it was just kind of, hey, what do you think about this idea? The original idea kind of morphed and pivoted and evolved a bit. And I had some really great people, all 10x people in their respective areas of, operations or marketing or sales. And we kind of came together, and it was pretty much fall of last year where we said, okay, here's what this means to do a startup, right? It's not our traditional kind of, all of our experience was more so in the traditional large company, corporate ecosystem, and said, this is going to be different, right? We're not going to have our corporate salaries on day one. We're going to have vesting schedules and stock options, but here's the dream, and here's what we can do with Epoch. And fortunately, since everybody came out of the marine industry, everybody's a lifelong boater. We've got decades of experience as people that enjoy boats and are on the water. We've got decades of experience as professionals in the marine industry. So really good contacts to be able to work the supply side of our business, but then also the downstream side with boat dealers and marketing channels and all of our customers. And then we're just at this point growing out and making connections into the energy side of it, because obviously dealing with bidirectional energy is a really complex issue. I would say it's not incredibly complex from a technical perspective, but from a interpersonal and regulatory perspective, it gets complex because we have different state laws, different municipality laws, different utility regulations and requirements. And, to your point a moment ago about how Florida, the governor of Florida just vetoed the bill that would ban net metering. Every state has different philosophies on that and different ways that they use it. And when we look at demand response and time of use metering programs, it means different things to customers, right? A customer in Texas might see a 20 cent per kilowatt hour differential on their net metering. A customer in Arizona might see 50 cents. And as they go to look at products like Epoch, that will make a difference, right? Because you might save a couple $100 a year at that 20-cent differential on your electricity bill, but then you can save, thousands plus if you have that higher differential. So that's kind of where we're at right now in terms of the bidirectional aspect of the product, is understanding exactly what that looks like and where it makes sense to deploy it in the early days. And I honestly expect that we will see more net metering as we progress into the future and we adopt more renewable energy source, and utilities look at it and say, hey, it makes sense for us to have this kind of tertiary power store that is owned by the consumer and distributed and deployable, but now we just need to connect with it and make sure that it doesn't hurt the grid at large.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Let's shift and talk a little about your go-to-market strategy. Are you guys planning to sell these to end consumers? Have you considered a fleet strategy? Are there other sorts of strategies that you've thought about, or is that a little bit out in the future?
We are right now targeting end consumers. We've got a wait list on our website, and we've got a number of people on it already. It's growing every day. So our launch plan is to provide boats to them. And we kind of have a walk before you run strategy here, right? Because electric boating is a nascent industry. When we look at market statistics, I mean, 99+% of boats on the market today have internal combustion engines on them. So we are in the very early days of that. And so step one for us is we need to sell a lot of electric boats, and we need to prove that we have the better use case. Nobody's going to buy a boat just because it's good for the environment, or they might save a couple $100 on their electricity bill, right? They want to buy a boat because it's fast and it's fun. It'll get me where I need to go. It's not going to have range limitations. And, it's less of a hassle. And that's a big part of our initial selling point, is we take the hassle out of boating, right? I mentioned before, no more carburetor rebuilds, no more bad fuel filters, no more oil changes. I have an electric boat that I've had for 6 years, and the only thing I've ever done with it is plug in my batteries, when I'm not using it. So that portion of it is really great. And with our hydrofoil system, we think we've solved the range problem and the speed problem that we typically see with electric boats. So that's phase one, sell to consumers. And then we do actually have some fleet level partners that we're in early negotiations with. And, I think that that's a really great business model, because at that kind of commercial scale, a fleet owner will tend to have, the ability to leverage demand response and those type of rebate programs much more than an end consumer will. And they'll obviously have, many more boats that are there to be able to provide power back to the grid. And that starts to become a really interesting proposition.
Yeah, that for sure makes sense. I don't want you to plug your competition, but are there any other players out there in the marketplace that are doing this? Are you watching them? And where do you see that shaking out?
There's it's a hot industry right now. So the marine industry tends to lag behind the automotive industry by about 10 years. So if we go back in our time machine and see where Tesla was 10 years ago, and as Rivian was starting to boot up and get their operation going, and all the other major automotive players. So come back to the future where we are today and say, okay, now's the time, right? We've advanced the technology, it's matured enough. Batteries are getting 7% more energy dense every year, and they're also decreasing in cost by 7 to 12% a year. So we're really at an interesting stage where, there's a lot of good tailwinds and the technology's ready, and people are getting used to it, right? Because they see a Tesla on the road, they see that low end torque and that great acceleration, and that's what you want in a boat, right? So we do have a couple of competitors out there, some who have tied into some of the really big institutional VCs and everything. GM actually recently backed a company with over $100 million in investment, and we see that all as great things. One of the nice parts about what we're doing at Epoch is we're coming in with a pretty different perspective on the market. So most of the other electric boat companies are targeting the ultra premium level of day boating, where they have $300,000 MSRPs. And we're coming in, we're targeting a sub $50,000 MSRP range, which about 90% of boats in the US that are sold sell for less than $50,000. So, our goal is maybe a little bit different than just selling electric boats, right? We want to sell a lot of electric boats and then help them enable this larger, goal towards helping the environment and helping the grid and scaling this energy distribution and storage system.
That makes a ton of sense. Like the strategy. So what that leads me to ask is you talked about the hydrofoil system. Without disclosing anything confidential, what's your IP situation, and do you think it's enough to defend against some of the more well-funded players?
Yeah, we have a pretty novel way of, well, it is novel. We have IP and process on it, and it's fundamentally different in how it stores, retracts, deploys, and manages stability for the vessel than what we see on some of the other players. So there are a couple of other hydrofoil boat players, and if you look at the way that their foils are, they're almost all identical. It would be hard to tell for someone who isn't really an expert in the space to say, am I looking at competitor A or competitor B? And ours are different in the way that we approach it, the way that we generate lift with the foils. And yeah, I feel pretty confident that we're going to be able to protect that. And one of the nice things about the way that we've designed and developed it is that it doesn't impinge on the interior of the boat in any way. So if you get into one of our boats and the foils are in the retracted position from the deck, it looks totally like a normal boat, and it'll drive and act like a normal boat, just with an electric, powertrain. And then when the foils are deployed, everything's happening below the surface. So again, there's no real difference. It's almost like a black box change for the pilot or the captain of the boat. And I will say it is, as a lifelong boater, when the foils are deployed and we're running on them, it is one of the coolest experiences. I was actually out on the lake all day yesterday running tests, and the way that the boat handles is just awesome. Like I wish I was a better storyteller so I could expand on that more, but it's one of those things where you kind of have to, I think, get on one and feel it, and it's transformative.
Very cool. Is it kind of like some of these boats I've seen are catamarans. Instead of a mono hull, you've got sort of two hulls. Does it handle like one of those, or is it different?
It's a little different than that as well. So our launch boats are all monohulls. We have future plans to expand out the product line and get into some multi-hull designs. But yeah, when the foils are out there, it's different, and it just, because you're above the water and you're not experiencing the drag from water, which water is 800 times more dense than air, so it generates a lot of drag when that hull is in the water. Um, Catamarans still have that issue, right? Even though they do some unique things with the multi-hull to try and get above the water and reduce that, it's on a different order of magnitude than what the foils do. So again, I wish I was a better storyteller. I wish I could explain it better, and maybe in the coming months and years I'll figure out a way to really verbalize it. But for now, I would just say anybody listening in, like we're gonna do a tour with some of our prototype boats this summer, and we'll be posting some stuff on social media about where we're going to be, and if we can get people scheduled, and that's going to be the best way, is to just get on one and feel it.
It sounds exciting. So that brings up some questions. You're going to do a tour. Are the boats? I know Teslas are quite a bit heavier than a regular car. Are the boats a lot heavier than a regular boat? Are there any challenges with towing them behind a truck on a trailer, launching them traditional way, or what's that experience like?
So before I dive into what we have on EPAC, I will push back on the statement that Teslas are heavier than a regular car. This is something that I've looked into quite a bit. And actually, if we take a Tesla Model 3 and compare it to a BMW M3, the Model 3 is only 200 pounds heavier than the M3. And basically what happens is, when you think about an internal combustion engine, we take away this big cast engine block, right? We take away a transmission, we take away oil pumps and oil pans, catalytic converters in the fuel system, and that takes about 1,000 pounds out of the car. And then if we replace all that with 1,000 pounds of battery, you end up really close on the EV versus an internal combustion engine vehicle. And following on that, we actually are very close in terms of weight. We're about the same, within 200 to 300 pounds of a typical internal combustion engine boat. The only differential being that that's when the internal combustion engine boat is full of fuel. So when they obviously burn down to 10% of their fuel capacity, they're going to be lighter still than we would be, because the batteries stay the same weight.
Makes sense. Can you pull them on a trailer?
Yes, absolutely.
Very cool. And no issue with salt water?
Nope, no issue with saltwater. In terms of trailering and use case, because we're focusing on consumers first, and because there is a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem with power available at docks and at slips, we're initially focused on customers that do trailer their boats and that would take it home, plug it in at their house, and then be able to leverage, whether it's time of use or demand response, or even just using their at-home one-way charging infrastructure to get savings versus paying gas prices at the pump. And then for on the water use case, full disclosure, when we look at blue water boats that are going 100 miles offshore to go to a canyon and do tuna fishing, battery technology and EV technology really isn't there today. We would have to have so many batteries on the boat that it would create issues with additional drag, and it just doesn't work. So we're really focused on nearshore and inland use case. So no issues with saltwater, but if somebody wants to go 15, 20, 30 miles offshore, it's not going to be the right solution today. But within a couple miles of shore, within the intercoastal waterway, on rivers, on lakes, it's a great application. And we see about 70% of boat owners fall into the use case where we could just electrify them tomorrow and they would see a benefit and no degradation in terms of, do they have the range that they want? Is their boat going to be available to be on the water? And we actually see it as a positive, because again, it takes away fuel costs, it takes away maintenance events. The boats are ready to go when people want to use them.
It makes sense. Have you done any inshore fishing off of them?
Yeah.
Are they, do you see a difference? I mean, in terms of, are they quieter and easier to approach? Because I know a lot of boats will have sort of those electric troll motors for sort of stealth and quiet as they're approaching some of the inshore fish. I don't know if this makes a difference for that application.
Yeah, so we, in terms of our powertrain, we actually are working with a couple of different electric outboard manufacturers, and they have different philosophies on how to put power to the propeller. So some of them have direct drive electric motors that are in the water, passively cooled by the water, and they are very quiet when you're, in the pilot's chair and you're driving. And, at speed, you can have a nice conversation with the person next to you. Um, I'm not sure if it's a little bit louder for the fish or not in that configuration. We have some other partners who they position their powertrains differently, where they have a more traditional, gear-driven prop in the water, and then their electric motor is up where the power head would be on a traditional ice outboard. And in that case, you do hear a little bit more of the EV, motor wearing or buzzing a little bit. So nowhere near as loud as what we would see on a combustion engine, but there is a minor noise associated with it. And unfortunately, even though I love fishing, I'm a pretty poor fisherman. So I think I mostly just like being out there, and having a fishing rod in my hand is a good excuse to be in nature. So I can't give you good data on whether or not it scares the fish away, but I suspect it's a little bit better than the ice counterparts.
I would imagine. And you mentioned that you like to sail, or that you grew up doing some sailing. Is there any applications for these on sailboats? I know a lot of sailboats have smaller motors. I used to have one with like a little 9-horse outboard. Um, do you see applications there?
So I mean, the sailing racing industry is really the progenitor for this concept, in my opinion. And when you look at like America's Cup racing sailboats, they have hydrofoils on them. They use them, and they're specialized and they're complex, and you need to be a world-class sailor to manage that. For a more consumer level sailboat, a leisure yacht, part of the issue with deploying a hydrofoil on it is that there is a minimum speed to get the net benefit of the hydrofoil. And so on our entry level 14-foot boat, we can use 10 to 15 horsepower, depending on how loaded the boat is. And we can achieve the speed we need to get the boat out of the water. But with a larger, thousands of pound sailboat, a 10 horsepower engine isn't going to generate the speed. So there's probably not a lot of use case in that particular application.
Makes sense. Let's shift and talk a little bit about financing strategy. Have you guys been in the market? Have you talked to some investors yet? Are there any particular investors or type of investors that you'd like to see come into the deal? And what's your time frame for wanting to launch, say, your next round of institutional funding?
So we are actively raising a pre-seed round right now. A lot of our focus, and we're somewhat early in the process, but has been on climate-oriented venture capital groups and angel groups. Surprisingly, the two areas of pushback that we've got, and maybe I'm disclosing too much here, but one has been that we're focused on consumer, and a lot of institutional investors seem to be a little bit unnerved by that. And then the other is actually around our build process. And I mentioned the team earlier and how great the team is amazing. We're well experienced in taking things from the whiteboard to the test lab to the model shop to the test lab into production and scaling it. And that's what we do. So there's been some pushback of like, well, who's going to build the boat for you? And it's kind of a funny question to me, because I'm like, well, you're looking at it, it's me and it's the team. Like, this is what we do. And, we have a great network of people to, bring on board as soon as we kind of get the round closed and everything, and scale it out from there. So, I think climate investors are a big one, because there's a huge value proposition from a pollution reduction perspective, just taking this industry to EV. And then also on the energy side, right? I think there's a lot of kind of blending between energy investors and climate investors as we shift into renewables and secondary battery stores with iron flow batteries and pumped hydro and things of that nature, and then getting into what we're pursuing at Epoch with tertiary battery stores. So I think those are kind of our ideal investors who get the vision and kind of understand where it's going to go.
Yeah, that sounds about right. There's also a huge category of investors that fall under mobility, and there's a good number of them that are not afraid of direct to consumer models. How big is your raise that you're looking to raise at this point?
Right now, we're pursuing a $2 million raise to get us into early production and, be able to serve our wait list right now, and then, really prove out that the market's ready for this style of boat and go from there.
Oh, very good. Well, to all the viewers out there, if you're investors in the sector, you should definitely give Tom a call. Tom, it's been a pleasure having you on the Energy Superheroes podcast. It's exciting what you're doing there at Epoch, and I look forward to having you back on the show. Call it in a year after you've done your fundraising and taking the company to the next level. And if you're down here in Florida on your tour, I'll definitely get on one of those boats. I'd love to try it out and see what it's like.
Absolutely. And thanks for having me, Peter. And we will 100% be in Florida. So I will reach out and we'll get you on the water.
Good stuff. Thanks, Tom.